Have you ever laughed at something not because it was funny, but because it was true, painfully true? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "What was silent in the Father speaks in the Son, and I often found in the Son the unveiled secret of the Father." And perhaps no book captures this raw unveiling of truth better than The Gay Science. This book isn't about joy in the way we usually imagine it. It's not about shallow happiness or easy pleasures. It's about a deep, almost defiant kind of joy that comes from staring into the abyss and deciding to dance anyway. In this part, let's begin to unfold Nietzsche's philosophy. Not as a dry academic exercise, but as a human experience. We'll explore why he thought we need laughter in the face of tragedy, what it means to live without absolute truth, and how questioning everything might be the beginning of a freer, more powerful life. Let's start with the title itself. The Gay Science, or Die fröhliche Wissenschaft in German, can be confusing. Gay here doesn't mean what it commonly does today. It refers to cheerfulness or joyful wisdom. Nietzsche uses the term to revive the spirit of the Provençal troubadour, medieval poets who combined art, wit, and passion in a celebration of life. But Nietzsche's version of joy isn't innocent or naive. It's the joy of someone who has suffered and still chooses to sing. He asks us, can we laugh in the face of suffering? Can we say yes to life, even with all its chaos, meaninglessness, and pain? This question is central to Nietzsche's idea of life affirmation. He believed that much of Western philosophy, religion, and morality was built on a denial of life, on trying to escape suffering, chaos, desire, and mortality. Christianity, for instance, promised salvation in another world and made this one look like a temporary waiting room. Nietzsche, in contrast, called us to love this life with all its imperfections. That's where his famous idea of the eternal recurrence begins to take shape. But we'll save the fuller version for a later part. For now, just imagine this. What if you had to live your life over and over again in exactly the same way? Forever? Would you say yes to it? Or would that feel like a curse? This isn't a metaphysical theory for Nietzsche. It's a test. If you wouldn't want to live your life again exactly as it is, maybe you aren't living it fully. Maybe you're avoiding something essential. The Gay Science dares us to examine ourselves in that mirror. But before Nietzsche asks us to affirm life, he breaks down the illusions we often build around it. In the early sections of the book, he writes in aphorisms, short, punchy reflections that often feel like riddles. One of them reads, "We have arranged for ourselves a world in which we can live by positing regularities, laws, strings of causes and effects. We have interpreted everything to fit our human needs." In other words, we didn't discover truth. We invented it, or at least we shaped it. Nietzsche believed that many of the so-called truths we live by in science, religion, morality, are just projections of human desire. They help us feel safe in a chaotic world. And while science may be more honest than religion in its method, Nietzsche still saw it as a kind of poetry, a dance of human interpretation. Truth, in his view, wasn't a fixed thing waiting to be discovered. It was more like a metaphor, a useful lie we agreed to believe. He writes, "Truths are illusions, which we have forgotten are illusions." That sounds cynical at first, but Nietzsche wasn't trying to make us despair. He was trying to free us. If our beliefs are illusions, then we can change them. If we created the rules, we can recreate them. That's the radical freedom Nietzsche offers. But freedom isn't easy. In fact, it's terrifying. That's why he says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." When you remove the traditional sources of meaning, God, morality, even objective truth. What's left to guide us? That's the crisis Nietzsche saw approaching, the collapse of certainty, and nowhere is that clearer than in his famous declaration, God is dead. But be careful, this isn't atheism in the casual sense. Nietzsche isn't just saying that he personally doesn't believe in God. He's saying that society, deep down, has stopped believing. The foundations of Western culture, which were built on belief in divine order, moral absolutes, and eternal purpose, are crumbling. But instead of facing that, people are still going through the motions, clinging to the shadow of a dead idea. He writes, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers. This is not a celebration, it's a warning. Without a new source of meaning, without a new way to navigate the chaos, we might fall into nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. And Nietzsche saw that danger everywhere, in the empty rituals of religion, in the blind faith in progress, even in the cold logic of science detached from values. So what's the way forward? That's where Nietzsche's joy comes back. But it's not a superficial joy. It's the joy of the free spirit, the one who has learned to live without certainty, who dances on the edge of the abyss. Nietzsche believed that to be truly free, we have to become creators, not just followers. We must create our own values, our own meaning, our own path. He called this process self-overcoming, where you constantly question and transform yourself, never becoming stagnant or dogmatic. One of the strongest images Nietzsche gives us is the metaphor of the dancer. He says, I would believe only in a God who could dance. It's a poetic way of saying that joy, movement, risk, these are divine to Nietzsche. The highest human type, in his eyes, isn't the ascetic or the moralist. It's the artist, the one who creates, even in the face of suffering. But this isn't just about painting or poetry. Nietzsche wants all of us to become artists of our own lives, to shape ourselves, to compose meaning from the raw materials of our experience. He even says, one must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That line captures so much of Nietzsche's spirit. He's not offering a system. He's not giving us rules. He's giving us fire. He wants us to struggle, to suffer, to rise, and in that process, to become more alive. And yet, Nietzsche is not naive about suffering. He doesn't glorify it as something noble, but he sees that often what makes us grow isn't comfort, it's challenge. He says, what does not kill me makes me stronger. That phrase has become a cliche now, but in Nietzsche's mouth, it's not about toughness for the sake of pride. It's about transformation. Every pain, every failure, every loss, if we face it with courage, if we integrate it, can make us more powerful, more conscious, more awake. That's the foundation of his joy. Not denial of suffering, but mastery of it. Not escape from life, but immersion in it. So, as we close this first part, here are the questions Nietzsche leaves us with. Are you living a life you would gladly live again, over and over? Are the truths you believe in really your own, or borrowed from someone else? Are you brave enough to question everything, even your most sacred values? And most of all, can you find joy, not despite suffering, but through it? Nietzsche believed that only by passing through the fire of these questions can we emerge truly free. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the figure of the free spirit, the challenge of nihilisms, and Nietzsche's powerful concept of eternal recurrence. There's a peculiar kind of silence that settles in after a storm, the silence not of peace, but of questions left unanswered. After confronting the bold idea that God is dead, many are left wondering, If God is no longer the cornerstone of truth, then what is? If absolute values crumble, can anything remain sacred? Nietzsche doesn't abandon us here. In fact, he takes us deeper, offering not just a critique of old beliefs, but a vision for what might come next. In this part of the gay science, we begin to understand what Nietzsche means by living with the burden and the freedom of creating our own values in a world without divine guarantees. One of the central questions Nietzsche raises is this: what does it mean to live honestly in a world where truth is no longer fixed? He challenges us to think of truth not as something static and eternal, but as something that evolves, shaped by the perspectives and needs of those who seek it. These are divine to Nietzsche, the highest human type. In his eyes, isn't the ascetic or the moralist. It's the artist, the one who creates, even in the face of suffering. But this isn't just about painting or poetry. Nietzsche wants all of us to become artists of our own lives, to shape ourselves, to compose meaning from the raw materials of our experience. He even says, one must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That line captures so much of Nietzsche's spirit. He's not offering a system. He's not giving us rules. He's giving us fire. He wants us to struggle, to suffer, to rise, and in that process, to become more alive. And yet, Nietzsche is not naive about suffering. He doesn't glorify it as something noble, but he sees that often what makes us grow isn't comfort, it's challenge. He says, what does not kill me makes me stronger. That phrase has become a cliché now, but in Nietzsche's mouth, it's not about toughness for the sake of pride. It's about transformation. Every pain, every failure, every loss, if we face it with courage, if we integrate it, can make us more powerful, more conscious, more awake. That's the foundation of his joy. Not denial of suffering, but mastery of it. Not escape from life, but immersion in it. So, as we close this first part, here are the questions Nietzsche leaves us with. Are you living a life you would gladly live again, over and over? Are the truths you believe in really your own, or borrowed from someone else? Are you brave enough to question everything, even your most sacred values? And most of all, can you find joy, not despite suffering, but through it? Nietzsche believed that only by passing through the fire of these questions can we emerge truly free. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the figure of the free spirit, the challenge of nihilisms, and Nietzsche's powerful concept of eternal recurrence. There's a peculiar kind of silence that settles in after a storm, the silence not of peace, but of questions left unanswered. After confronting the bold idea that God is dead, many are left wondering, if God is no longer the cornerstone of truth, then what is? If absolute values crumble, can anything remain sacred? Nietzsche doesn't abandon us here. In fact, he takes us deeper, offering not just a critique of old beliefs, but a vision for what might come next. In this part of the gay science, we begin to understand what Nietzsche means by living with the burden and the freedom of creating our own values in a world without divine guarantees. One of the central questions Nietzsche raises is this: what does it mean to live honestly in a world where truth is no longer fixed? He challenges us to think of truth not as something static and eternal, but as something that evolves, shaped by the perspectives and needs of those who seek it. This shift is powerful. Think of it like this: instead of a divine voice whispering eternal truths, truth becomes a human project, a creation, not a discovery. Nietzsche writes, what then is truth? A mobile army of metaphors? Illusions we have forgotten are illusions. What he's saying is that what we often call truth is just a set of ideas we've repeated for so long that we've forgotten we invented them. They feel solid, but they're fluid, formed by culture, language, and power. It's both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because it means we are no longer bound by inherited dogmas. Terrifying because we can no longer hide behind them. In this spirit, Nietzsche introduces another potent idea, the will to power. Many misunderstand this phrase as simply a desire for control or dominance, but Nietzsche's meaning is far more nuanced. The will to power is not about tyranny. It's about creativity. It's about the drive within every living thing to grow, to expand, to transform itself. He's asking, are you becoming who you are? Are you shaping the world or merely reacting to it? This is especially clear when Nietzsche writes about artists and thinkers. He admires those who don't just interpret the world, but reshape it. In this context, the philosopher is not a passive observer, but an artist of ideas, sculpting meaning, crafting values, experimenting with perspectives. But how do we become such creators? How do we live artistically? Nietzsche points us toward what he calls the aesthetic justification of existence. Since life is full of suffering and chaos, he suggests we treat life like a work of art, not because everything is beautiful, but because framing even the tragic parts artistically gives them form, meaning, and dignity. It's about learning to say yes to life in its entirety, even the pain, even the loss, without escaping into comforting illusions. He reminds us that we are not just thinkers, we are feelers, dreamers, lovers, and sufferers. So he proposes a radical alternative to traditional morality. Instead of aiming for peace and comfort, we aim for intensity and depth. We don't avoid the storm, we walk into it with open eyes. This is where Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of fate, enters. He challenges us to love our life not just in spite of its difficulties, but because of them. Imagine looking back on every moment of your life, every heartbreak, every mistake, every triumph, and saying, yes, I would live it all again. That's amor fati, not passive acceptance, but active embrace. And it's not some abstract ideal. Think about your own life. What if, instead of constantly regretting the past or fearing the future, you chose to affirm the whole of it? What if you stopped seeking perfection and started seeking transformation? Of course, this kind of life demands courage, an intellectual courage that Nietzsche thinks is rare. What can I create from this? What kind of life would be worthy of my suffering? Nietzsche doesn't offer comfort. He offers challenge, not security, but depth, not heaven, but earth. And maybe that's enough. There comes a point when a person must ask, not only, what do I believe, but also why do I believe it? And even further, what does this belief cost me? As we journey deeper into the gay science, Nietzsche invites us into this uncomfortable but liberating space where questioning becomes the tool for transformation. In the earlier parts, we explored Nietzsche's declaration of God's death, his emphasis on the will to power, and the birth of a free spirit who dares to create meaning rather than inherit it. But Nietzsche knew that declaring the death of God is not the end of the story. In fact, it's only the beginning, because what happens when the old values are gone, when there is no longer a divine voice to tell us good from evil, right from wrong? What takes its place? Nietzsche doesn't offer quick answers. Instead, he gives us a paradox. To find new values, we must first experience the collapse of meaning. And in that void, in that terrifying space where nothing feels certain, we're forced to confront the raw truth of our existence. But this confrontation isn't a punishment, it's an opportunity. Nietzsche tells us that only those who've descended into the depths of their own inner world, who've suffered disillusionment, can truly create something new. He writes, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. That quote isn't just poetic, it's instructional. Chaos isn't the enemy, it's the precondition for creativity. So here's the question. Are you willing to face your own chaos, your fears, contradictions, broken beliefs? Most people aren't. Most prefer comfort, routine, borrowed truths. But Nietzsche's challenge is for the few, those willing to go beyond safety to seek something deeper. This is where we encounter one of his most intense and demanding ideas, the doctrine of eternal recurrence. At first glance, it sounds like a mystical concept, but it's actually a psychological test. Imagine, Nietzsche says, that one day a demon whispers in your ear, this life, as you now live it, you will have to live again countless times, exactly the same, every pain, every joy, every detail, over and over, forever. How would you respond? Would you fall to your knees in horror, cursing your existence? Or would you rejoice, saying, yes, I want this life again and again? This idea is not meant to be taken literally. It's a tool, a way to measure your life. If you would dread repeating it forever, then something is wrong. Not with the world, but with how you are living in it. The goal isn't perfection, it's affirmation, the willingness to say yes to your life. Not only to the highlights, but to the whole. Nietzsche is teaching us a radical form of responsibility. He's saying, stop waiting for someone else to give your life meaning. You must choose it, shape it, affirm it. This is not the morality of the herd. It's not about obedience, guilt, or fear of divine punishment. Nietzsche despised herd morality, the kind of morality that says, be good so others will like you, or follow the rules and be rewarded. He believed such thinking keeps people small, timid, afraid of standing out. Instead, he calls for what he names noble morality, the morality of creators, of individuals who define their own values from a place of strength. These are not selfish people, they are responsible people, but their responsibility comes from inner freedom, not outer pressure. This idea leads us to Nietzsche's portrait of the Übermensch, often translated as the Overman or Superman. But forget the superhero image. The Übermensch is not about muscles or power over others. It's about power over oneself. It's about becoming the kind of person who can give birth to their own values, who doesn't look outward for validation, but inward for creation. The Übermensch is someone who transforms suffering into strength, doubt into insight, isolation into independence. It is someone who lives as if their life is their art. And perhaps most importantly, it is someone who can laugh. Yes, laugh, because Nietzsche's gay science is not a grim book. Despite its deep questions and critiques, it's filled with humor, irony, and even joy. That's why he calls it gay, not in the modern sense, but in the classical one. Cheerful, light-hearted, daring. This laughter is essential because once you've torn down false idols and endured the desert of nihilism, what remains is not despair, but lightness, a playfulness that knows life is absurd and yet still dances. Nietzsche teaches us that joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning, and meaning is something we must construct, not discover. He writes, we have art in order not to die of the truth. What is this truth? That life is finite, suffering is real, certainty is a myth. But through art, whether painting, music, love, or philosophy, we find a form to hold the chaos. We create beauty not to escape reality, but to confront it more honestly. And here's the surprising twist. Nietzsche's philosophy, for all its critique and fire, is ultimately a philosophy of love, not the sentimental love of fairy tales, but a fierce, demanding love, a love of life itself. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, he wants us to say yes to existence, not because it's easy, but because it's rich, full, unpredictable. He's not selling happiness, he's offering depth. So let's return to that recurring question. What do you believe, and why? If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations, Nietzsche invites you to break free. You've ever suffered and asked, what's the point? He invites you to create the point. If you've ever felt the world is meaningless, he challenges you to become the one who gives it meaning. He knows this path isn't for everyone. Most people would rather be told what to think. Most people would rather follow. But if you're still listening, if you're still asking, then maybe, just maybe, you're one of the few ready to take this path. It won't be easy. You will doubt yourself. You will be misunderstood. You will face moments of despair, but you will also experience a kind of freedom and strength that cannot be faked or borrowed. Nietzsche doesn't want followers. He wants creators. He doesn't want worship. He wants rebellion, not for destruction's sake, but for transformation. So here's the final idea for today. Live dangerously, not recklessly, not without care, but with boldness. Take risks with your thinking. Question the things you hold most sacred. Step beyond your comfort zone, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Nietzsche writes, "For believe me, the secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness, and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously." This doesn't mean chaos for chaos's sake. It means refusing to settle, refusing to let fear shrink your life, refusing to let comfort numb your soul. Because the truth is, we are not here forever, and every day we are either becoming who we are or drifting further from it. So which will you choose? When we continue exploring Nietzsche's The Gay Science, especially in this part, it becomes clear how deeply Nietzsche challenges us to rethink values, truth, and the human spirit. In previous sections, we saw his critique of traditional morality, the death of God, and the emergence of new ways of living and thinking. Now, the focus shifts even more to the creative power within each person, the joy of embracing uncertainty, and the vital task of becoming who we truly are. One of the most important ideas Nietzsche presents here is the concept of amor fati, the love of fate. This isn't just about accepting what happens to us, but loving it fully, affirming life in all its complexity and contradiction. Nietzsche wants us to embrace everything, the good and the bad, pain and joy, success and failure, because this total acceptance is what gives life its meaning. He asks, how can we find happiness if we resist or regret parts of our life? Instead, if we can say yes to our fate, everything that has shaped us and continues to shape us, then we are truly free. This attitude of amor fati also connects to Nietzsche's broader rejection of pessimism. Life isn't a problem to be solved or a burden to be borne. It's a creative challenge to be engaged with. Nietzsche warns us against the temptation to see life only in negative terms, to fall into despair or nihilism when confronted with suffering or the loss of faith. Instead, he encourages a joyous affirmation, a yes to existence that springs from strength and creativity. But what does this mean practically? How do we practice amor fati in everyday life? Nietzsche suggests it requires a radical honesty with ourselves, to confront our weaknesses, mistakes, and failures without illusion, but also without self-hatred. It means cultivating courage, resilience, and above all, a deep gratitude for the chance to exist at all. This gratitude is not naive or sentimental. It's the hard-won recognition that life, in all its messiness, is still the greatest gift. Another theme that Nietzsche deepens here is the importance of art and creativity. If life is a constant flux and uncertainty, then creating meaning becomes an artistic act. Nietzsche sees the true philosopher not as someone who seeks fixed truths, but as a kind of artist, someone who plays with ideas, shapes perspectives, and brings new possibilities into being. Philosophy itself becomes a form of creation, a way to express the deepest human experiences. This leads us to Nietzsche's idea of the free spirit. The free spirit is someone who has broken away from conventional beliefs, traditions, and herd mentality. They don't rely on external authorities for meaning, but instead trust their own judgment and instincts. The free spirit lives with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to question everything, including themselves. This freedom isn't easy. It comes with loneliness, risk, and the burden of responsibility. But it's also where true growth and transformation happen. In this part, Nietzsche also explores the relationship between knowledge and power. He challenges the assumption that knowledge is simply about uncovering objective facts. Instead, knowledge is always tied to interpretation, perspective, and will. The pursuit of knowledge is an expression of life's striving. It's not neutral, but shaped by our desires, values, and drives. This insight reminds us to be critical of claims to absolute truth and to recognize the creative and sometimes dangerous nature of ideas. Nietzsche's critique of science and philosophy here is especially relevant today. He doesn't reject science outright, but warns against scientism, the belief that science alone can answer all questions and provide ultimate meaning. Nietzsche invites us to see science as one way among many to engage with the world. Valuable but limited, the true challenge is to integrate knowledge with wisdom, to balance reason with passion and intuition. As we approach the closing reflections of this part, Nietzsche emphasizes the role of laughter and joy in the philosopher's life. The gay science itself is about celebrating knowledge and life with a lightness of spirit. It's a joyful wisdom that can hold contradictions, face suffering, and still find reasons to smile. Nietzsche suggests that laughter is a sign of strength, the ability to see the absurdity in life and respond with humor rather than despair. In fact, humor and irony become tools for the free spirit to dismantle dogma and pretension. Through laughter, we can break the spell of rigid beliefs and open ourselves to new ways of thinking. This joyful skepticism is not cynicism, but a creative force that keeps philosophy alive and dynamic. Throughout this part, Nietzsche also grapples with the idea of eternal recurrence, the thought experiment that asks us to imagine living our life over and over again, exactly as it happened. This concept pushes us to consider how we would live if we had to relive every moment infinitely. Would we embrace life fully, or would we despair? Eternal recurrence is a test of our affirmation of life. Nietzsche presents it not as a metaphysical claim, but as a challenge to live authentically and meaningfully. So, what can we learn from all this? Nietzsche's message in this part calls us to live boldly, to create our own values, and to find joy in the act of becoming. He invites us to embrace uncertainty, accept our fate with love, and cultivate the strength to laugh at life's contradictions, rather than seeking security in fixed truths or external authorities. We must trust our own creative power to shape meaning. In practical terms, this means questioning our assumptions, challenging societal norms, and daring to be different. It means cultivating resilience and gratitude, even when life is hard. And it means recognizing that philosophy and knowledge are not just abstract pursuits, but deeply personal, creative acts that can transform our experience. Nietzsche's The Gay Science pushes us to rethink what it means to be human, not as passive observers of reality, but as active creators of meaning. His philosophy is not a set of answers, but an invitation to engage with life fully, with courage, humor, and love. As we finish this part, remember Nietzsche's words. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Embrace your inner chaos, your contradictions and doubts, for they are the source of your greatest creativity and freedom. As we come to the final part of our exploration of the gay science, Nietzsche's ideas invite us to reflect on what it truly means to live a meaningful, joyful life in a world without fixed certainties. Throughout the book, he has dismantled old beliefs and urged us to become creators of our own values. Now, in these closing reflections, Nietzsche reveals his vision for the future of humanity, a future where individuals embrace freedom, creativity, and the challenge of endless self-overcoming. One of the central themes Nietzsche returns to is the idea of the Übermensch, or Overman. The Overman is not some distant, mythical figure, but a real possibility for human evolution, a person who has transcended conventional morality and societal expectations to live authentically and powerfully. This figure embodies the highest form of human potential, one who creates new values and affirms life in its fullest complexity. Nietzsche challenges us. What does it mean to become an overman in our own lives? It means to reject complacency, to refuse to accept the status quo, and to embrace constant growth and transformation. This is not an easy path. It requires courage to face the uncertainties and contradictions of existence. It demands that we take full responsibility for our choices and actions without relying on external guides or fixed doctrines. Closely connected to this idea is Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence, which we touched on earlier. The thought experiment of eternal recurrence asks us to imagine living our lives repeatedly, exactly as they are, forever. This is a powerful test. If you would dread living the same life again and again, then you have not fully embraced your existence. But if you can affirm it, love your fate with all its highs and lows, then you have achieved a profound acceptance of life. This challenge pushes us to live deliberately and fully. Every moment gains weight and significance because it is not just a fleeting instant, but part of an endless cycle. Nietzsche uses eternal recurrence not as a metaphysical truth, but as a moral and existential test. It asks, are you willing to say yes to your life as it is? If not, what changes can you make to live in a way that you would gladly relive forever? Another key insight Nietzsche offers is the death of God, which is not merely a religious statement, but a radical shift in human consciousness. With the death of traditional religious faith, the old sources of meaning and morality vanish. This leaves a void, what Nietzsche calls nihilism, but he also sees this moment as an opportunity. The collapse of old certainties creates space for new values, new ways of understanding the world, and new modes of being. Nietzsche warns us against falling into despair or nihilism, which is the temptation to see life as meaningless after losing the old foundations. Instead, He calls for a revaluation of values, a creative process where we invent new meanings and purposes that reflect the realities of our time and our own unique perspectives. This is where Nietzsche's gay science shines, a joyful, life-affirming wisdom that embraces uncertainty and creativity. It is a science not just of facts, but of life itself, a playful and courageous engagement with existence. This joyful wisdom recognizes that truth is not static, but evolving, and that knowledge is intertwined with interpretation and perspective. In this spirit, Nietzsche encourages us to live with lightness, the ability to face life's challenges without heavy burden or despair, to meet suffering and joy alike with a kind of dance. This lightness is not frivolous, but a profound strength that arises from self-mastery and acceptance. So, how can we embody these ideas in our own lives? Nietzsche's philosophy is not about abstract ideals, but practical transformation. It asks us to question everything we have been taught, to examine our beliefs and values critically, and to have the courage to create new ones. This process is deeply personal and requires honesty, humility, and persistence. It also means embracing the creative power within each of us and to become artists of our own existence. We are called to shape our lives with intention, to find meaning in the struggle, and to celebrate the freedom that comes with self-overcoming. Nietzsche's insights also remind us of the importance of community and dialogue. Though he emphasizes individual creativity, he recognizes that we grow through interaction with others, through challenging conversations, shared experiences, and the exchange of ideas. The free spirit thrives not in isolation, but in connection with others who also seek to live authentically. At the same time, Nietzsche warns against the herd mentality, the tendency to conform uncritically to social norms and collective opinions. The herd comforts itself with easy answers and fixed beliefs, but this comfort comes at the cost of genuine freedom and creativity. To become free spirits, we must be willing to stand apart, to face loneliness and misunderstanding, and to remain true to ourselves. Finally, Nietzsche's The Gay Science culminates in an invitation to embrace life with passion, curiosity, and joy. It is a call to dance with the uncertainties of existence, to laugh at its absurdities, and to create meaning where none is given. This is the essence of the gay science, a joyful pursuit of wisdom that celebrates life's infinite possibilities. As we reflect on these teachings, we can see how Nietzsche's philosophy remains deeply relevant today. In a world filled with rapid change, uncertainty, and challenges to old values, his call to courage, creativity, and affirmation offers a powerful guide. It reminds us that meaning is not handed down, but forged by each of us in our own unique way. Before we close, consider Nietzsche's words that capture the spirit of the gay science. You must become who you are. This simple but profound command asks us to look inward, to discover our true selves beyond societal roles and expectations, and to live boldly from that place of authenticity. Thank you for journeying through Nietzsche's The Gay Science with me. If you found this summary meaningful, please like the video and share it with others who might appreciate these ideas. Philosophy is a shared adventure, and your engagement helps keep these important conversations alive.